At exactly 2:30 a.m., the space beside me empties. I don't wake all at once. It happens in fragments. First, the sound of the mattress easing upward, a careful shift of weight. Then the whisper of fabric sliding against fabric. My eyes stay closed, but my body knows before my mind does. The air changes. The warmth that was pressed along my back vanishes, replaced by a thin ribbon of cold that slips under the blanket. The clock on my nightstand glows a dull blue. 2:30. Every night. I lie perfectly still, listening to his breathing as it moves away from me. Slow, measured, practiced. He thinks I'm asleep. I let him believe it. The floorboard near the door gives its usual soft complaint, a sound we've both known for years. He pauses there. I can feel the pause, the way silence thickens when someone is waiting to see if they've been heard. My heart is beating so loudly I'm sure it must reach him. But after a few seconds, the door opens. A narrow blade of hallway light cuts across the ceiling. Then it's gone. And I am alone in a bed that suddenly feels much too big. Where does a man go at 2:30 in the morning, every night, without waking his wife? The first time it happened, I told myself it was nothing. People wake up. They get water. They use the bathroom. They pace when sleep won't come. We had both been under pressure then, deadlines, bills, the quiet, grinding stress of adult life that never announces itself but is always there. When he slid back into bed 10 minutes later, his skin cool and his breathing uneven, I pretended not to notice. But it happened again the next night, and the night after that. Soon it became a pattern as precise as the ticking clock. 2:30, not 2:27, not 2:35, always 2:30. My body began to anticipate it. Even in deep sleep, some internal alarm dragged me to the surface just before the moment arrived. I would hover there, suspended between dreaming and waking, waiting for the familiar sequence. The shift, the cold, the door. During the day, he was almost the same man I had married. Almost. He still made coffee the way I liked it, strong and dark, sliding the mug across the counter with a small, absent smile. He still asked about my work. He still laughed at the shows we watched in the evening. But something delicate had moved out of alignment. His eyes didn't rest on mine as long as they used to. When I spoke, there was sometimes a beat too long before he responded, as if he were returning from somewhere far away. I noticed the way his phone never strayed far from his hand. He wasn't constantly texting or scrolling. It was subtler than that. He just kept it near, face down, like a secret placed gently on every surface he touched. I hated the direction of my thoughts. Suspicion is a slow poison. It doesn't flood you all at once. It seeps in, coloring everything. I would watch him rinse a plate and wonder what he was thinking. I would see the faint shadows under his eyes and imagine hidden conversations, hidden lives. Then guilt would rise up just as quickly. This was the man who had held my hand through hospital corridors, who knew the exact spot on my shoulder that eased my headaches. How could I reduce him to a collection of doubts? So I said nothing. At night, I returned to my role. I lay still at 2:30 a.m., counting the seconds between the moment he left the bed and the click of the door. Sometimes he was gone for 5 minutes, sometimes 15. Once, he didn't come back for nearly half an hour. That night, my throat tightened until it was hard to breathe. I imagined him standing outside in the dark, speaking in a low voice to someone whose name I did not know. When he finally returned, the mattress dipping gently as he slid in beside me, I could smell the faint scent of cold air on his skin. Not the sharp bite of outside winter, but the neutral, empty smell of a house at night. He lay on his back, staring at the ceiling. I kept my breathing slow and even. After a while, his hand reached for mine under the blanket, fingers curling loosely around my wrist as if to reassure himself that I was still there. I didn't sleep at all after that. Days accumulated. My thoughts circled the same questions until they wore grooves in my mind. I searched for evidence of anything unusual, receipts in his pockets, strange charges on our shared account. There was nothing. His routines remained steady. Work, home, dinner, the quiet comfort of our evenings. If there was another life hidden somewhere, it left no visible trace. And yet the nights continued. The house itself seemed to conspire in the mystery. In daylight, it was familiar and harmless. At night, it transformed. Shadows stretched into unfamiliar shapes. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a distant engine. Every small noise carried meaning. When he left the bedroom, I followed his progress through sound alone. The soft brush of his hand along the hallway wall, the near-silent turn of the kitchen faucet, the faint creak of a chair. He was always careful, deliberate, as if he were performing a ritual he had perfected over time. My emotions tangled into something I could no longer easily name. There was fear, yes, but not the sharp fear of danger. It was a deeper unease, the fear of being excluded from a truth that lived inside my own home. There was also sadness. A quiet mourning for the simplicity we had once shared, when the night was just a place for sleep and not a stage for secrets. I tried to talk to him once. We were sitting on the couch, the television casting flickering light across his face. The question rose to my lips, heavy and awkward. "Where do you go at night?" But when he turned to me and smiled, a tired but genuine curve of his mouth, the words dissolved. I asked instead if he was sleeping well. "Not really," he admitted. "Just restless, I guess." His honesty disarmed me. Restless. Such a small, harmless word. I nodded and leaned my head on his shoulder. His body felt solid and warm. For a moment, I hated myself for doubting him. Everyone has private corners of themselves. Marriage didn't erase that. Love didn't grant me the right to inspect every shadow. But that night at 2:30 a.m., when the bed went cold again, my resolve fractured. I decided to watch. The next evening, I prepared with a care that felt almost absurd. I went to bed earlier than usual, feigning exhaustion. He followed not long after. We lay in the dark, speaking softly about ordinary things, a colleague's joke, a neighbor's new car. His voice was calm. If he was carrying a secret, it did not tremble there. I slowed my breathing, letting my body sink into the mattress. When his own breaths deepened and lengthened, I allowed my muscles to slacken as if I had surrendered to sleep. Inside, I was alert, every sense sharpened. Time stretched. The clock's glow shifted minute by minute. 2:28, 2:29. At 2:30 he moved. Up close, the choreography of it was almost tender. He eased his arm from beneath my neck with infinite patience, pausing each time I stirred. His fingers hovered above my shoulder for a second, as if resisting the urge to touch me. Then he slipped from the bed and stood in the darkness. I opened my eyes to the thinnest sliver. His silhouette was a darker shape against the dark room. He turned toward me. For a heartbeat, I thought he could see my gaze. My pulse hammered. But he only watched my face, searching for signs of wakefulness. Apparently satisfied, he turned and walked to the door. I counted to 5 after it closed. Then I slid out of bed. The floor was cold under my feet. I winced as a board murmured beneath my weight and froze, listening. No reaction came from the hallway. I moved forward, each step deliberate. The door opened with a whisper. The house was washed in moonlight. From the end of the corridor, I could see a dim glow spilling from the kitchen. His shadow moved across the wall, elongated and strange. I stayed close to the wall, my breath shallow. Every instinct told me to retreat, to return to the safety of the bed and the ignorance it offered. But another force pulled me onward, the simple, stubborn need to know. As I reached the corner, I heard a sound that stopped me. Not a voice, not a phone, a sound softer than either. A quiet, uneven exhale, then another. The rhythm of it was intimate, almost fragile. I leaned forward just enough to see into the kitchen. He was sitting at the table. The overhead light was off. Only the small lamp near the sink was lit, casting a pool of gentle yellow around him. His shoulders were curved inward, his hands wrapped around a mug he wasn't drinking from. In front of him lay a single sheet of paper. He was crying. The realization hit me with such force that I had to grip the wall to steady myself. The sound I had heard was the quiet breaking of his breath. Tears tracked down his face unchecked, catching the light. He didn't sob or make any dramatic gesture. The grief in him was contained, disciplined. It lived in the tight line of his mouth, the tremor in his fingers. I had never seen him cry like that. For a long moment, I could only stare. All my suspicions scattered, replaced by a bewildered ache. This was not the scene I had imagined. There was no whispered conversation, no secret lover waiting in the dark. There was just my husband, alone at a kitchen table in the middle of the night, unraveling in silence. He lifted the paper with shaking hands and read it again. His lips moved slightly, tracing words I could not hear. Then he folded it with meticulous care and pressed it to his chest, closing his eyes. I felt like an intruder in a sacred space. The air between us was heavy with something I did not understand. Questions crowded my mind, but none of them carried the sharp edge of accusation anymore. They were softer now, threaded with concern. I took a step backward, the floor cool and real beneath my feet. The urge to go to him was almost overwhelming. To cross the room, to place my hands on his shoulders, to ask what pain he was carrying alone. But another instinct held me in place. This was a moment he had carved out in secret, a private ritual of grief. To shatter it abruptly felt like a kind of violence. So I retreated. Back in the bedroom, I slipped under the covers and arranged my body in the familiar shape of sleep. My heart was still racing, but it was no longer fueled by fear. It was something else now, a tender, frightened empathy. Minutes later, he returned. The mattress dipped. His skin was cool. He lay on his side, facing away from me. In the darkness, I listened to his breathing steady. I stared at the faint outline of his back and felt the distance between us like a physical thing. Not the distance of betrayal, but the distance of an unshared sorrow. I realized then that whatever he was doing at 2:30 a.m. was not about leaving me. It was about surviving something I had not yet seen. And as I lay there, the question that had haunted me for weeks shifted into a new, more unsettling shape. What kind of pain makes a person wake every night to meet it alone? The next morning, he moved through the kitchen as if the night had never happened. Sunlight poured in through the window, bright and ordinary. He stood at the counter slicing fruit with steady hands. The knife tapped rhythmically against the board. If I hadn't seen him at the table hours earlier, his face wet with silent tears, I would have sworn nothing in the world could bend him that way. I watched from the doorway, a strange double vision overlaying the present. The man in front of me and the man from 2:30 a.m. occupied the same body, but they felt impossibly far apart. "Morning," he said, glancing up with a small smile. "Morning." My voice sounded normal. I was proud of that. I poured coffee and sat across from him. The mug warmed my hands, but a chill lingered inside me. I searched his face for traces of the night, redness around the eyes, swelling, anything. There was nothing obvious. If he had cried again after returning to bed, he had erased the evidence with the efficiency of someone used to hiding. We spoke about trivial things, a meeting he had scheduled, a package I was expecting. Our words skimmed the surface of the day, careful and polite. Underneath, my thoughts churned. What was on that paper? The image of it burned in my mind, a single sheet handled with reverence, folded and pressed to his chest like something sacred. I replayed the scene in fragments, the way his shoulders had curved inward, the sound of his breath catching. It didn't look like the grief of fresh news. It felt older, worn smooth by repetition. This wasn't the first time he had sat at that table in the dark. It was a ritual, one he had been performing long before I noticed. A quiet panic bloomed in me. How long had I been sleeping beside a man carrying a sorrow I knew nothing about? Marriage creates an illusion of total knowledge. You believe over time that you have mapped the other person completely. Their habits, their fears, the shape of their thoughts. Discovering a hidden room inside someone you love is like finding a door in your own house that you never saw before. I wanted to ask him directly. The urge pulsed in my throat all day. But every time I imagined the conversation, I saw his face closing, shutters sliding down behind his eyes. He had guarded this part of himself with such care. Forcing it open felt wrong, and yet doing nothing felt worse. That evening, I paid closer attention to the subtle distances between us. He was gentle, as he always was. He asked about my day and listened to the answer. He reached for my hand when we crossed the street, but there were moments when his gaze drifted, snagging on something invisible. In those seconds, he seemed to recede from the room, pulled toward an interior landscape I could not follow. I wondered if I had missed signs before. Memory is unreliable. Once suspicion enters it, the past rearranges itself to accommodate the present. I thought back over the previous months, the late nights at work, the increasing quiet. Had this sorrow been growing then, a shadow lengthening behind him while I went about my days unaware? Guilt pressed heavily on my chest. Love carries a quiet responsibility, to notice. Had I failed at that in some fundamental way? When we went to bed, I lay with my back to him, eyes open in the dark. My mind was a restless loop. I told myself I would sleep, that I would let the night pass without watching. But as the minutes ticked by, my awareness sharpened instead of fading. 2:17. 2:24. My pulse quickened as the familiar moment approached. Part of me dreaded it now. Seeing him like that had shifted something inside me. The mystery was no longer an abstract puzzle. It was a wound I had glimpsed, and the thought of witnessing it again filled me with a tender fear. At 2:30 he moved. This time I didn't wait. As soon as the door closed, I slipped out of bed and followed, my steps quieter than the night before. The house seemed to hold its breath. The same dim light glowed in the kitchen. He was already seated at the table. The paper lay in front of him. For a moment, he simply stared at it, his hands resting flat on the surface as if bracing himself. Then he unfolded it. I edged closer, staying in the shadow of the hallway. My heart pounded so loudly it felt intrusive. I could see the faint lines of text on the page, but not the words themselves. His lips moved again, tracing the sentences. A tear slid down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. There was something unbearably intimate about watching him grieve like this. It felt like standing at the edge of a confession he had never intended to make. I saw the tension in his jaw, the way he swallowed hard after each silent reading. This was not passive sadness. It was an active engagement with pain, a deliberate reopening of something that hurt. Why return to it every night? The question lodged in me like a splinter. Most people avoid their pain. They bury it under distractions and routines, but he was doing the opposite. He was seeking it out at the same hour, as if answering a summons. A floorboard creaked softly beneath my foot. The sound was small, but in the stillness it was thunderous. His head snapped up. For a suspended second, our eyes met across the dim kitchen. Shock flared in his face, quickly followed by something rawer fear. Not fear of being caught in wrongdoing, but fear of exposure. As if I had stumbled upon him undressed in a way far more vulnerable than physical nakedness. I froze. Every prepared word evaporated. We stared at each other, the distance between us charged with unspoken questions. I began, but my voice faltered. He folded the paper with sudden urgency, his hands trembling. He didn't try to hide it completely. He just held it tightly, like a shield pressed to his chest. The tears on his face glistened in the low light. "You're awake," he said unnecessarily. His voice was hoarse. "I woke up and you weren't there." It was a weak explanation, but it was all I had. Silence stretched. I could see him weighing his options, the conflict etched in the tight lines of his expression. Part of him seemed to want a retreat, to build the walls back up. Another part looked exhausted from the effort of holding them in place. I took a tentative step into the kitchen. The air felt thick, difficult to breathe. "I didn't mean to spy," I said softly. I was worried." The word hung between us. Worried. It was safer than the truth, which was a tangled knot of fear and curiosity and love, but it carried enough weight. His shoulders sagged slightly, as if he had been expecting anger or accusation and didn't know what to do with concern. He looked down at the paper in his hands. His fingers traced its folded edge with a kind of reverence. "I didn't want you to see this," he murmured. "I know." I moved closer, stopping a few feet away. "But I already did. At least I saw you last night." His breath caught. A flicker of embarrassment crossed his face, quickly swallowed by something deeper. Shame, maybe. The sight of it hurt me in a way I hadn't anticipated. "You should have woken me," I said. "You don't have to do this alone." He let out a soft, humorless laugh. "That's the problem," he said. "I thought I did." The words settled heavily in the room. I felt their implications ripple through me. Whatever this was, it wasn't a recent development. It was a belief he had been carrying, that this burden was his and his alone. He gestured vaguely to the chair across from him. After a moment's hesitation, I sat. The table felt like a boundary we were both afraid to cross. The lamp cast gentle shadows across his face, emphasizing the hollows beneath his eyes. For a long time, he said nothing. He just stared at the folded paper, his thumb moving back and forth over its surface. I resisted the urge to reach for it. This had to come from him. "I've been trying to figure out how to tell you," he said finally. "Every day I think tonight I'll say it, and then night comes and the words feel impossible." "You can take your time," I whispered. He shook his head. "I've taken too much time already." His gaze lifted to mine. The vulnerability there was almost unbearable. I saw love in it, and fear, and a deep, aching weariness. "This," he said, holding up the paper slightly, "is a letter." I nodded, my throat tight. "It arrived a few months ago. I didn't recognize the handwriting at first. I almost threw it away with the rest of the mail." His voice wavered. "I wish I had." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "It's from someone I thought I'd never hear from again." The air seemed to thin around us. My mind raced through possibilities, but none of them felt solid enough to land on. I watched his face, searching for clues in the lines of it. "Who?" I asked gently. His fingers tightened around the letter. For a moment, I thought he might retreat again. But then something in his expression settled, a quiet decision locking into place. He took a shaky breath. And I realized, with a sudden, piercing clarity, that whatever name he was about to say would change the shape of our lives in ways I couldn't yet imagine. He opened his mouth to speak. "It's from Urindor." The name meant nothing to me. I searched my memory automatically, flipping through years of shared stories, old friends, distant relatives. It didn't connect to anything. The unfamiliar sound of it seemed to hover in the air between us, heavy with significance that only he could feel. "Who is Urindor?" I asked quietly. His jaw tightened. For a moment, he looked almost relieved that I didn't recognize it. Then the relief gave way to something more complicated. He hesitated, as if the word itself were a fragile object. "He was my brother." "Was?" The past tense landed with a soft, devastating weight. I stared at him. In all the years we had been together, he had never mentioned a brother. I knew the broad outlines of his childhood. A small town, distant parents, a sense of loneliness he rarely elaborated on. But a brother was not a small detail to omit. It was a missing chapter. "I didn't know you had a brother," I said. "I know." His voice was barely above a whisper. "That's because I've been pretending I didn't." The confession settled over us like dust. I felt a strange disorientation, as if the ground beneath our shared history had shifted. How could something so fundamental have remained hidden? And yet the pain in his eyes told me this wasn't a casual secret. It was a wound he had sealed shut and buried deep. "He died," he continued, 15 years ago. I inhaled sharply. The pieces rearranged themselves in my mind. A dead brother, a letter arriving months ago, the nightly ritual of grief, but the timeline didn't fit neatly. "How did he write to you if he—" I couldn't finish the sentence. He looked down at the letter, his thumb tracing its edge again. "He wrote it before he died," he said. "I just never got it until now." A chill moved through me. There was something haunting about the idea of a message traveling through time, surfacing after years of silence. I imagined the letter sitting forgotten in a drawer somewhere, waiting patiently to be discovered. "It was found in a box," he explained. "My mother passed away last year, you remember." I nodded. I remembered the quiet phone call, the hurried trip back to his hometown, the muted grief he carried when he returned. He hadn't spoken much about it. I had assumed the distance between them made the loss complicated. "I went back to sort through her things a few months ago," he said. "There was a box in the attic labeled with my name. Inside were old drawings, school papers, and this letter. It was unopened. She must have kept it from me." His voice cracked on the last sentence. The betrayal in it was raw and fresh, layered on top of older pain. "Why would she do that?" I asked softly. He let out a shaky breath. Because of what happened to him, to us. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I leaned forward slightly, my hands clasped together to keep them from trembling. Every instinct told me I was standing at the edge of something immense. When we were kids, he said slowly, Urindor was different, not in a way that was obvious to everyone, but I saw it. He felt things too deeply. Every emotion was turned up to a volume that hurt him. Our parents didn't understand it. They thought he was dramatic, difficult. He paused, his eyes distant, seeing a past I could only imagine. I was older by 2 years. He followed me everywhere. I was supposed to protect him. His mouth twisted. At least that's what I told myself. I felt a quiet ache bloom in my chest. The image of a younger version of my husband, shadowed by a fragile sibling, was painfully vivid. When we were teenagers, things got worse for him, he continued. He withdrew. He stopped eating properly, stopped sleeping. He would come into my room at night and just sit on the floor, staring at nothing. I didn't know what to do. I was a kid. I thought it was a phase. His hands tightened into fists on the table. One night, he told me he didn't want to be alive anymore. He said it so calmly, like he was commenting on the weather. I remember laughing nervously and telling him not to say stupid things. I thought, if I didn't treat it seriously, it wouldn't be serious. The shame in his voice was a tangible thing. It filled the space between us, heavy and suffocating. I should have told someone, he whispered. I should have dragged him to our parents, to a doctor, to anyone. But he begged me not to. He said I was the only one he trusted. And I wanted to keep that trust. I told myself I could handle it, that I could fix it. A tear slipped down his cheek. He didn't seem to notice. A few weeks later, he was gone. The words fell with a quiet finality that made my breath hitch. I reached across the table instinctively, my hand hovering before settling over his. His skin was cold. He left a note, he said. Not a long one, just an apology. He said he was tired, that he loved me, that it wasn't my fault. His laugh was a broken sound. But of course it felt like it was. I was the last person he told, the one who did nothing. My throat tightened painfully. I squeezed his hand, wishing I could transfer some of the compassion flooding me into him. Our parents, they shattered, he continued. My mother especially. She couldn't say his name without crying. The house became a museum of his absence. Every room was haunted by what we didn't say. And in all that grief, there was this unspoken accusation hanging in the air. I felt it every time she looked at me. He swallowed hard. She never said it outright, but I knew she blamed me, and I blamed myself more than she ever could. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I left. He lifted his gaze to mine, his eyes red-rimmed and pleading for understanding. I moved away as soon as I could. I built a new life. I told people I was an only child. It was easier than explaining. Easier than reopening that door every time someone asked about my family. I convinced myself that if I didn't talk about him, if I didn't think about him, I could outrun it. His fingers trembled in mine. For years, it almost worked. The guilt was still there, but it was muted, like a scar instead of an open wound. And then I found this letter. He carefully unfolded the paper, smoothing it on the table between us. My eyes were drawn to the handwriting, uneven, earnest, unmistakably young. He wrote it a few days before he died, my husband said. I can tell by the date. He must have hidden it somewhere, planning to give it to me. Or maybe he gave it to our mother and she couldn't bear to pass it on. His voice softened as he looked at the page. It's not a goodbye letter. That's what destroyed me when I read it. It's hopeful. He writes about how he's scared of his own thoughts, how he doesn't understand why his brain hurts all the time. He says he wants help, that he's thinking about telling our parents, and then he thanks me for listening to him, for being his safe place. A sob caught in his throat. He says, I think I can get better. I just need a little more time. The words seemed to echo in the quiet kitchen. I felt tears sting my own eyes. The tragedy of it was almost too much to hold, the fragile hope captured in ink, frozen just before everything unraveled. I read that line, he whispered, and it was like the past cracked open. All I could think was he asked me for time, and I didn't give it to him. I didn't push hard enough. I didn't save him. He pressed a hand to his face, his shoulders shaking. This was not the contained grief I had witnessed before. This was a dam breaking. I stood and moved around the table without thinking. When I wrapped my arms around him, he collapsed into the embrace, his forehead pressing against my stomach like a child seeking comfort. I held him as he cried, my fingers threading through his hair, murmuring wordless reassurances. In that moment, the mystery of his nightly disappearances felt painfully simple. He had been returning to this letter, to this frozen fragment of hope, punishing himself with it. Night after night, he reopened the wound, tracing the contours of a guilt he had carried alone for 15 years. When his sobs subsided into quiet tremors, he pulled back slightly, his eyes swollen and glassy. "I come down here every night to read it," he admitted. "I tell myself I'm trying to understand, to make peace with it, but I think I'm just reliving the moment I failed him, over and over." His voice was small, stripped of any defenses. "I don't know how to stop." I didn't answer him right away. His words hung between us, fragile and exposed. I don't know how to stop. There was something terrifying about their simplicity, not dramatic, not theatrical, just honest in a way that stripped everything else away. I guided him back into the chair and sat beside him instead of across from him this time. The letter lay open on the table, its edges slightly curled from being handled so often. I could see where faint creases had formed, permanent lines etched by repetition. This wasn't just paper anymore. It was a ritual object, a doorway he kept stepping through. "You don't have to stop," I said softly, "not all at once." He looked at me with a kind of startled confusion, as if he had expected condemnation or an easy solution. People like easy solutions. You need to let go. You need to forgive yourself. Clean phrases that sound wise and accomplish nothing. "You lost someone you loved," I continued. "And you never got to grieve him properly. You buried it. Of course it's coming back now." His gaze dropped to the letter. His fingers hovered over it but didn't touch. "It feels like I'm erasing him if I stop reading it," he admitted. "Like this is the only thing I have left that's real." The sentence pierced me. I understood then that the letter wasn't just a source of pain. It was proof that his brother had existed in a way that couldn't be denied or softened by time. Ink on paper, a voice preserved. "You're not erasing him by living," I said. "He's already part of you. That doesn't disappear." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't see him," he whispered. "You don't know how bright he was, how alive. When he laughed, it filled the whole room. And I keep thinking, if I had just done one thing differently, he might still be here. We might both be older now. He might have a job he hates and a partner who steals the blankets. Ordinary things. I stole that from him." The weight of his self-blame settled heavily in my chest. It was so absolute, so total, that it left no room for nuance. In his mind, the world had narrowed to a single point of failure, and he had placed himself squarely at its center. "You didn't steal anything," I said gently. "You were a child trying to hold something bigger than you. That's not theft. That's being human." He flinched slightly, as if the kindness hurt more than accusation would have. For a long moment, we sat in silence. The refrigerator hummed softly. Somewhere outside, a car passed, its tires whispering against the pavement. The world continued in its indifferent rhythm, unaware of the small earthquake unfolding in our kitchen. "I've been afraid to tell you," he said finally. "Not because I thought you'd judge me, but because, once I said it out loud, it would become real again. I've spent so long pretending this part of my life belonged to someone else, a stranger I used to be." He turned to me, his eyes searching mine. "And I didn't want you to see me as that person, the one who failed." I felt a sharp, aching tenderness. I cupped his face in my hands, forcing him to meet my gaze fully. "I see you," I said. "All of you, the man you were, the man you are, they're the same person, and neither of them is a failure." His breath hitched. I felt the tension in his jaw, the years of silence pressing against the fragile space we were creating. Loving someone is often described as knowing them completely, but this felt different. This was not about knowledge. It was about witnessing. Standing beside him as he turned toward a part of himself he had kept hidden even from his own reflection. "I don't know how to carry this with you," I admitted quietly. "I can't fix it. I can't change what happened, but I can sit here, I can listen. You don't have to come down here alone anymore." The offer felt small compared to the enormity of his pain, but it was the only honest thing I had. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since I'd found him in the kitchen, I saw something like relief flicker across his face. Not because the pain was gone, but because it was no longer sealed inside him. "I was so sure," he murmured, "that if I told you, you'd look at me differently." "I do look at you differently," I said. Fear flashed in his eyes. "I understand you more," I finished. The fear softened into something else. Gratitude, maybe, or simple exhaustion. He folded the letter again, but this time the motion was less frantic, more deliberate. He placed it gently on the table and rested his hand on top of it, as if acknowledging its presence without surrendering to it completely. "I've been thinking about seeing someone," he said hesitantly. "A therapist. I almost made an appointment last week, but I canceled it." "Why?" He stared at the wood grain of the table. "Because part of me believes I deserve to feel this. That letting go would be disrespectful, like I'm betraying him by healing. The logic of grief is cruel and circular. It convinces you that suffering is loyalty, that pain is proof of love." "He wanted help," I said softly, nodding toward the letter. "That's what he wrote. He wanted a future where he felt better. Do you really think he'd want you trapped in the same darkness?" His eyes filled again, but the tears that gathered there were quieter, less frantic. "I don't know," he whispered. "I think he'd want you to live," I said. "Fully, not just in the daylight hours." The phrase seemed to settle into him. I saw it in the way his breathing changed, deepening slightly. A small shift, but a real one. We stayed there until the first gray hints of dawn began to seep through the window. The night loosened its grip on the house. Shadows retreated into corners. The ordinary shape of the world returned. He looked older in the growing light, not in a diminished way, more complete, as if the years he had tried to outrun had finally caught up and taken their place in his face. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know. I don't want this to be the thing that defines me," he said, "but I don't know who I am without it. I've carried it for so long it feels structural, like if I pull it out, everything else will collapse." His honesty was breathtaking. So much of adulthood is performance, carefully curated versions of ourselves presented to the world. Sitting there with him, stripped of pretense, felt like standing in a rare and sacred clearing. "You're more than your worst moment," I said, "and more than your grief. Those things are part of you, but they're not the whole architecture." He gave a faint, shaky smile. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," I said. "It's just possible." The word lingered in the air. Possible, not guaranteed, not easy, but within reach. He picked up the letter and looked at it one last time before folding it carefully and slipping it into his pocket. "I think," he said slowly, "I'll make that appointment again, and this time I won't cancel." A quiet warmth spread through me. It wasn't triumph. There was no sense of a problem solved, just a gentle recognition that we were standing at the edge of a different path. "I'll go with you," I said. He shook his head, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. "I know you would, but I think I need to walk into that room on my own, at least the first time." I nodded. There was strength in that decision, a reclaiming of agency he had denied himself for years. The sky outside had softened into pale blue. Morning was arriving with its usual indifference, carrying the promise of routines and responsibilities. But something inside the house had shifted. The silence between us was no longer crowded with unasked questions. It was open, shared. He reached for my hand and held it tightly. "Thank you," he whispered. The gratitude in his voice was almost unbearable. I squeezed his fingers, feeling the steady pulse beneath his skin. As we sat there, watching the night give way to day, I realized that the terror I had felt weeks ago, the fear of a secret tearing us apart, had transformed into something quieter and deeper. Not all secrets are walls. Some are doors. And when they finally open, what waits on the other side is not the end of love, but the place where it becomes real. That night, I woke at 2:29 a.m. without meaning to. For a split second, panic rushed in on instinct. My hand reached across the bed, expecting emptiness. But my fingers met warm skin. He was still there, lying on his side, his breathing slow and even. The clock shifted to 2:30. I held my breath. In the weeks since our conversation in the kitchen, the ritual had changed. Not disappeared, changed. The first night after he made the appointment, he still woke at the same precise minute. I felt the familiar tension coil in his body before he moved. But instead of slipping out of bed, he sat up and stayed there, his silhouette rigid in the dark. I sat up too. Neither of us spoke. Words felt unnecessary, almost intrusive. He swung his legs over the side of the bed, then hesitated. I could feel the old gravity pulling at him, the muscle memory of grief urging him toward the kitchen. Instead, he turned back to me. His face was a blur in the darkness, but I could sense the question in it. Not permission, exactly, more like a silent acknowledgement. This is the moment. I'm trying to do it differently. I reached for his hand. He squeezed it once hard and lay back down. His breathing was uneven for a while, each inhale a small act of resistance. Eventually, it smoothed. Sleep reclaimed him in fragments. I stayed awake longer, listening to the quiet victory of his stillness. Not every night was like that. Sometimes he did get up, but when he didn't go alone. He would touch my shoulder gently, a soft invitation. We would walk to the kitchen together, the floor cool beneath our feet. He would read the letter once, his voice barely above a whisper, and I would sit beside him. We didn't dissect it or analyze it. We just let it exist in the room with us. The first time he read it out loud, his voice broke on the line about wanting more time. The sound of those words, spoken into the air we shared, felt like a release valve opening. The grief didn't disappear, but it changed texture. It was no longer a private storm contained inside his chest. It was whether we were standing in together. Therapy began on a gray Tuesday afternoon. He came home quieter than usual, not withdrawn, concentrated, like someone carrying a fragile object inside them. We ate dinner in a gentle silence. I didn't ask what they had talked about. He didn't offer. There was an unspoken agreement that this space was his to navigate at his own pace. Later, as we were washing dishes, he spoke. "I told her about the letter," he said, staring at the stream of water running over a plate. "And about the nights." I dried the dish in my hands, waiting. "She said something I didn't expect." He turned off the faucet and looked at me. "She said I've been trying to solve a problem that doesn't have a solution. I keep going back to that moment, looking for a version of myself who could have saved him. But that person doesn't exist. He never did." The simplicity of it landed with a quiet force. I saw the echo of it in his expression, a mixture of resistance and recognition. "How did that feel?" I asked. "Infuriating," he admitted with a small, humorless smile. "And relieving at the same time." Healing, I was learning, was not a clean upward line. It was a conversation between opposing truths. The part of him that clung to guilt fought against the part that longed for absolution. Therapy didn't silence that conflict. It gave it a place to speak. Over the next few weeks, I watched subtle shifts ripple through him. He started talking about his brother in daylight. The first time it happened, we were walking through a park, leaves crunching under our feet. A child ran past us, laughing, the sound bright and unguarded. He smiled, a distant softness in his eyes. "Urindor used to laugh like that," he said. The name hung in the open air. He didn't flinch after saying it. He didn't look away. He just let it exist between us, attached to a memory instead of a wound. "What was he like?" I asked. And he told me. He spoke about a boy who built elaborate cities out of cardboard boxes, who cried at sad movies and didn't pretend otherwise, who once stayed up all night to finish a painting because he couldn't bear to leave it incomplete. As he talked, his voice warmed. The grief was still there, a quiet undertow beneath the stories. but it was joined by something else, affection untainted by shame. I realized then that for years, he had reduced his brother to a single moment of loss. Therapy was helping him expand that memory, restoring its dimensions. Urindor was becoming a person again, not just a tragedy. The nights grew easier. 2:30 a.m. still arrived with its punctual certainty, but the charge around it faded. Some nights he slept through it entirely. When he did wake, the urgency that once propelled him out of bed had softened. He would lie there, staring at the ceiling, and I would feel his fingers find mine in the dark. One night, he spoke into the quiet. "I dreamed about him," he whispered. I turned toward him, my eyes adjusting to the faint outline of his face. "He was older," he said. "The age he would be now. We were sitting in a cafe, arguing about something stupid. I don't even remember what, but he was happy, ordinary, alive." His voice trembled. When I woke up, I felt this crushing sadness, but underneath it there was gratitude, like my mind had given me a gift, a glimpse of a life he never got to live, but that I could still imagine for him. I pressed my forehead gently against his shoulder. The intimacy of the confession filled the space between us with a quiet reverence. "You're carrying him forward," I murmured. He was silent for a long time. Then he nodded, a small movement I felt more than saw. "I think that's what scares me," he said. "If I let myself imagine him growing older, it means accepting that I am." That life kept moving, and part of me has been frozen back there, waiting for permission to follow. "You have that permission," I said softly. "From him, from yourself." The words felt fragile as they left my mouth. Permission is an abstract thing, easy to grant and hard to believe. But I felt their truth settle into the dark around us. Months passed. The letter moved from his pocket to a small wooden box on his desk. He didn't read it every night anymore. Sometimes weeks went by without him opening it. When he did, it was with a different energy. Less like a penance, more like a conversation across time. Our marriage changed in ways I hadn't anticipated. There was a new honesty between us, a willingness to name fears before they calcified into silence. We talked about things we had previously skirted around, our anxieties about the future, the quiet disappointments we carried, the fragile hopes we were afraid to articulate. His vulnerability had opened a door in both directions. I found myself stepping through it with my own hidden rooms. One evening, as we were getting ready for bed, he held the letter in his hands, turning it over thoughtfully. "I used to think this was a weight," he said, "something dragging me backward, but now it feels different." "How?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "It's a reminder," he said, "not just of what I lost, but of what matters, of how much time is worth. He wanted more of it, and I have it. Wasting it on endless punishment suddenly feels wrong." The simplicity of the realization took my breath away. It wasn't a dramatic epiphany, just a quiet recalibration of priorities. But I could see its effects in the way he moved through the world, more present, more deliberate. That night, I woke again at 2:30 a.m. The habit of awareness still lingered in my body. I turned my head slightly, listening. He was asleep, his breathing deep and steady. Moonlight traced a pale line across his face, softening the edges of his features. I watched him for a long moment. This hour had once been a threshold into fear, a doorway into suspicion and loneliness. I had dreaded it, imagining secrets that could splinter the life we had built. Instead, it had led me here, to a deeper understanding of the man beside me and of the quiet courage it takes to confront old ghosts. I reached out and brushed my fingers lightly against his hand. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open just enough to register my touch. A sleepy smile curved his lips. "You okay?" he murmured. "Yes," I whispered. And I meant it. As I settled back into the pillow, a calm certainty filled me. The terror I had once associated with this moment was gone, replaced by something steadier. Love, I realized, was not the absence of darkness. It was the willingness to sit beside someone in it until morning came. The clock ticked softly on the nightstand. 2:31. Time was moving, as it always did. carrying us forward whether we were ready or not. For years, he had been trying to live outside of it, circling a single point of pain. Now he was stepping back into its current, imperfect and afraid, but moving nonetheless. I closed my eyes and listened to the rhythm of his breathing, syncing my own to it. In that quiet alignment, I felt the fragile, persistent hope that defines all human stories, the belief that we can survive what breaks us and still find our way toward each other. And as sleep finally took me, the hour that once terrified me felt almost gentle, a reminder that even the darkest moments can become, in time, just another part of the night we learn to live through.